Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
Hands-on Apologetics. I am Gary Michuta, and you have entered into Virgin Most Powerful Radio Apologetics Dojo, and it's great to be with you today. It's always fun to be in the dojo to work out, to kind of expand our abilities, sharpen our skills, so that we'll be able to explain, defend the faith with confidence, clarity, and charity. And there's no better thing in the world than doing that, than sharing the faith. And helping people, encounter Christ and get rid of these intellectual objections that people have, misunderstandings, myths, and all that stuff. So that's what we do here on Hands-On Apologetics. And today we have a great guest. His name is Dr. Robert Delfino. He's been on once before. We invited him back because, first, he's just a really, really cool guy, and a great, one of those type of guys you could kick back and have a coffee or an adult or something and talk about Aquinas, and he can make it so simple and so easy to follow that it's great to have him. And so we're going to tackle one of the Aquinas' proofs for the existence of God. Now, Aquinas has his famous 5 ways, 5 different approaches for explaining and demonstrating the existence of God. We're going to tackle the 3rd way, from necessity and possibility. Now, that one's kind of abstract. They're all a little abstract, quite frankly. But Dr. Delfino is going to help walk us through it. And by the way, he's also a co-author of a book with Matt Fradd called Does God Exist? A Socratic Dialogue on the 5 Ways of Thomas Aquinas. And it's actually, it's a terrible title. It's accurate, but it's terrible, because if you ran across that title, you would think, oh boy, this is just going to be so pedantic, I won't be able to follow anything. But it's actually a really rollicking dialogue, fictional dialogue between AJ and Lucy at a coffee shop, where AJ is an ardent atheist and Lucy is a Catholic who's finishing up her higher degree, and in theology, and she is defending the faith very, very well. So he's coming on the other side of the break. Also, we have our finding the fallacy, our intellectual skills, building up have a real nice muscular intellect, and so that when people give us arguments that really don't jive, they don't necessarily follow, we'll be able to figure out what's wrong with them, and hopefully we can clarify it for them. And today's finding the fallacy, by the way, is the cherry-picking fallacy, which has nothing to do with picking fruit from trees. It actually is picking data from arguments. And we also meet an early church father. Today's early church father, I really like. His name is St. SOPHRONIUS of Jerusalem. So that is our Meet the Early Church Father for today. And you know what? It's time for us to give our shout-outs to all you watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. I also want to welcome all of you listening podcast through our flagship website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And also all those listening on podcast, all the different feeds that we have. Everybody, it's great to have you all in the dojo together. So, yes, just good stuff all around. So why don't we, without further ado, Beth wants a weather report. Well, it stopped snowing, Beth, so the Midwest Command Center is up and running, although a little slower than normal. So thank you for that shout out on YouTube. That's our weather report for today. Let's go to Finding the Fallacy, which I think is much more helpful for everybody listening. Finding the Fallacy today is the cherry-picking fallacy. It's also known as suppressing evidence or the fallacy of incomplete evidence. And basically, it's an act of pointing out individual cases or data that seem to confirm a particular position while ignoring a significant portion of related cases or data that may contradict that position. So I think we are familiar with, the cherry-picking fallacy, because it occurs whenever the only evidence you adduce is all the evidence that supports your position, and you just ignore everything else, especially that contradicts your position. So in a way, you're kind of giving a distorted view of, all the evidence. And this occurs very, very often in apologetics, discussing, sharing, defending the faith, because because people, they want to believe certain things, and so whenever they find things that fit with what they believe, then that's what they use. But in fairness, in a way to avoid cherry picking, what you need to do is at least acknowledge, if there is evidence to the contrary, that it does exist. And if you want to go the extra step, you might want to bring it out and explain why the evidence to the contrary maybe doesn't have as much probative weight as as to change your mind about your position. Okay, and this occurs especially with the early church fathers, by the way. Lots of people cherry pick the early church fathers. They pick the fathers that say the things that agree with them, and they ignore the ones that disagree. And like I said, to get a true picture of all the evidence, we have to at least acknowledge when there's evidence to the contrary, if not address it. And when you do that, you have a super strong argument, and that's what we're shooting for here at the dojo. We're not throwing rabbit punches here. We're doing roundhouse punches, and to do that, you got to acknowledge all the data. All right, so that's our finding of the fallacy for today, the cherry-picking fallacy. Let's talk about the early church father. Today's early church father is Saint Sophronius of Jerusalem. And Saint Sophronius, like I said, he's one of my favorites. And why is he one of the favorites? Well, he's kind of like the David and Goliath, but unfortunately David didn't really slay Goliath. In regards to this heresy known as monothelism. So let's talk a little bit about St. Sophronius. Sophronius is Patriarch of Jerusalem. He was born in Damascus about the year 560 A.D. and died in Jerusalem around 638 A.D. He is known as Sophronius the Sophist, but the latter term is in no way derogatory. When we talk about people today, we call them sophists. That's not a good thing, But actually, the term sophist in this regard is that he taught rhetoric, which is totally different. Sophronius was a monk in Egypt about a year 580 afterwards in the Jordan Monastery, and then still later with Theodosius in Jerusalem. He was a friend and companion of John Moschus, I think is how you pronounce it, and his journey to Rome. Sophronius, now this is the part that makes him near and dear to my heart. St. Sophronius carried out an ardent but very unsuccessful campaign against monothelism. I'll tell you what that is in a second. And his death in 638 was probably hastened by the tragedy of the fall of Jerusalem a few months earlier by the Caliph Omar. So St. Sophronius was a pugilist for the faith against the heresy of monothelism. Now, what is monothelism? Now, here, folks, this is one of the benefits of listening to Hands-On Apologetics. Here's a chance for you to impress the rest of your Catholic friends. You could bring up monothelism in a discussion. This is one of those points about Jesus that even really solid Catholics that otherwise, they're pretty well catechized in that, they get mixed up on. Okay, and the question is, how many persons are in Christ? The answer is one divine person, the second person of the Holy Trinity. Okay, how many natures does Christ have? Now, sometimes people get mixed up. The correct answer is there are two natures in Christ. He's fully divine and he's fully human. Okay, and those two natures are distinct. They're not mixed together or joined together or However, they're two distinct natures in one divine person. Okay, fine and dandy. If some people get tripped up on that part, but everything is still good. Next question. How many wills did Jesus have? Or does Jesus have, I should say? Well, people think about that, and they say, well, he had one will, right? He had the divine will. So everything he did was what God did, and it's all divine. But there's a problem, though. If you say there's only one will, and usually it's the divine will, then he doesn't truly have the full human nature, because it's part of human nature to have will. So the correct answer is that Jesus has two wills, one divine will and the human will. And of course, since Jesus never sinned, then that means that the two wills, the human will and the divine will, never contradicted one another. They're always in concert with one another. And that the heresy is called monothelism, where they insist that Jesus only had one will. Either he didn't have a human will through a complete human nature, or the human will was kind of subsumed into the divine nature. So it really didn't matter. The human was like a puppet of the divine will. And, of course, that is what Sophronius battled against. Now, the cool thing about Sophronius, when he comes down, and by the way, he goes after the patriarchs. Okay, so Saint Sophronius had a lot of courage. He traveled in 633 to Alexandria to encourage the Monothelite patriarch there, Cyrus of Phasis, to abandon monothelism and embrace the Orthodox understanding. And later he also went to Sergius of Constantinople. So that is our Meet the Early Church Father today, St. Sophronius of Jerusalem. And coming up on the other side of the break, Dr. Robert Delfino is coming on. We're going to talk about Aquinas' third way to prove God's existence. Stay tuned, everybody.
Welcome to our January 11th, 2020 Spiritual Warfare Conference. Every year without fail, this is our most popular, well-attended event. This year's Spiritual Warfare Conference will host Adam Bly, a Catholic demonologist, and an auxiliary member of the International Association of Exorcists, along with Dr. Luis Sandoval, a psychiatrist who's part of the Healing, Deliverance, and Exorcism team for the Diocese of Orange. These two gentlemen bring tons of experience and expertise in the area of spiritual warfare. This is going to be a high-information Catholic seminar. I'll be there as well, sharing some riveting stories on the diabolical and liberation found through Jesus Christ from my best-selling book, The Devil in the City of Angels. Mark your calendars, come and join us, and meet other radio hosts from Jesus 911. Contrary to popular belief, spiritual warfare is not demon-centered, it's Christ-centered. Come join us and learn how to armor up and fight the good fight of faith. Catholics, wake up. Don't hit the snooze button. Join us at St. Christopher Catholic Church, 629 South Glendora Avenue, West Covina, California, on January 11, 2020. See you then. Strength and honor in Jesus' name.
Six. Stay awake and pray that you may not enter into temptation. According to St. Ephraim, Jesus, who feared nothing, experienced fear and asked to be freed from death, although he knew it was impossible. How much more must we persevere in prayer before temptation assails us, so that we may be freed when the test has come? May God grant that we may withstand temptation and carry out His will in all
Holy
things.
Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526 2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. And, there's so much atheism has been on the rise for quite a while, and we have lots of weapons that we can use to rationally demonstrate that God exists. And it's always good for us to be able to maybe have one or two arguments that you feel comfortable with that you can share with somebody if they ever say, well, there's just no reason to believe God exists. You can give them some very solid reasons. And, of course, the classic ones come from St. Thomas Aquinas in his 5 ways, 5 demonstrations for the existence of God. And we're going to tackle one of them today, the third way, with none other than Dr. Robert Delfino. Dr. Delfino received his Ph.D. from State University in New York at Buffalo, where he specialized in metaphysics and medieval philosophy. His current research interests include metaphysics, ethics, and the relationship between science, philosophy, and religion. And he's also the co-author of an outstanding book, which I mentioned at the beginning of the program. It's called Does God Exist? A Socratic Dialogue on the 5 Ways of Thomas Aquinas. He co-wrote it with Matt Fradd. And Dr. Delfino, welcome to Hands-On Apologetics.
Gary, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Sorrowful mystery.
Oh, it's great to be with you, too. Thomas Aquinas, I think when people, hear the name, if they aren't already in the field of philosophy or religion, they're probably pretty intimidated by him. I mean, that's a pretty heavy hitter, intellectually speaking.
Wait, now do you mean the atheists are intimidated by him or the average person?
I think both. At least the people who haven't really dipped their toe into the massive ocean of philosophical thinking. Should he be intimidating?
Well, I do remember reading years ago online on one of these atheist forums, and one of these guys said that he hated Thomas Aquinas because he was so good and had such strong arguments. So I guess in some level there's that level of respect that he is a formidable opponent. So maybe in that sense he's feared.
Yeah, that's true. And once again, I got to congratulate you on your book with Matt Fradd because Does God Exist? A Socratic Dialogue on the 5 Ways. It was so entertaining reading it, and both of you do such a great job boiling down what probably could be really abstract ideas to a fun dialogue between two people in a coffee shop.
Oh, thanks, Gary. And thank you so much for those kind words. And I want to thank Matt again, because without him inviting me to be part of that project, it never would have happened for me. So I want to give a shout out to Matt Fradd and all the good work that he does too.
Yeah, absolutely. So today, let's talk about the third way. Now that's the argument from necessity and possibility. And I'm just curious, why the third way? Is there one of the 5 ways that is stronger than the other ways, in your opinion?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. Well, look. In life, this is a poor analogy, but it'll make my point. Some people like basketball, and that's great. It's a wonderful sport. Some people like baseball, and some people like football. Some people are more attracted to the first way, about change. And a lot of people, Thomas himself felt that the first way about change, which we talked about last time, is probably the clearest, or maybe one of the more easier ones to grasp. My favorite is the one we're going to do today, the third way, which, of course, we'll get into. And then the 5th way has always been very popular, that, nature seems very orderly and things like that. So I would say to the audience, find one of the ways that you really resonate with and then, study it more deeply because, we don't need metaphysics to be saved, of course. We don't need any of this philosophy stuff, right? Salvation is a gift from God and all of that and faith. But find one intellectual way that really resonates with you. Work on that, because all you really need is one way if you want to illumine your mind, in an intellectual, philosophical way. So that's what I would say.
That's good. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think Mortimer Adler thought the third way was the most persuasive of the 5.
He wrote, I forgot the title of the book, but he wrote a book where he gives his variation of the third way. When I read it years ago, I wasn't quite a fan of it, but I'll lay out how I think the third way is best unfolded.
Okay, where do we start?
Good point.
Oh, Jesus.
So, The background question to the third way is probably something that most people have thought about at one time or another. The question would be this: why does anything exist at all? Or if you make it more personal, why do I exist? And then usually after you say, why do I exist, like, well, why does anybody exist? So that's the background question to the third way. Any questions before I go on? Because I could talk forever.
Oh, no. Well, yeah, why does I mean, that really is the ultimate question. But I think most people just assume that, well, everything has to exist. Otherwise, it's almost nonsensical to put into, the flip side, isn't it? I never thought about that. Why does things exist?
Well, we live in a in some ways, very privileged and precious time because, with all of our technology and our creature comforts living in the United States of America, we have it pretty good. So probably most of the time we're thinking about how we can relax or have pleasure. So we probably aren't probing too much on why does anything exist at all. We do take it for granted. But it is a deep philosophical question.
Yeah. So why does anything exist?
Okay, so I'm going to dive into the argument, right? We've been dancing around it a little. Let me define some terms because we need to do that. And then I know we have about 9 more minutes, so I'll do what I can in that time, and then we'll, put the extra pieces together later. So,
pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
This is one of those things. You're right. Common people, people who don't do philosophy, say being. A being is anything that exists. Right? So you're a human being, I'm a human being, there are cats, there are dogs, there are trees, even a dream. That, we probably all had a dream last night, even if we don't remember it. A dream is a kind of being. It is a thing that exists. Now, it only exists in the mind, but it's still a kind of being. So the two kinds of beings that we need to understand the third way are what we call possible beings, or sometimes contingent beings, and necessary beings. So I'm going to define those in a moment, unless you want to chime in.
Nope, that sounds fine. Yeah, so being is something that exists, and so you have contingent and necessary. Okay, gotcha.
Okay, so possible being is actually the word Thomas uses.
Okay, possible.
Then contingent. So let's start with a possible being. A possible being is something that's capable of existing, but it doesn't have to exist. The easiest example would be, yourself. The audience can think of themselves as well. So if my parents never met, I wouldn't exist. Right? So this is one way to understand that my existence is contingent. I don't have to exist. And if my parents never met, I wouldn't exist. So that's what a possible being is. And then a necessary being is something. Now this is deep. That must always exist. In other words, it's impossible for it not to exist. Now, I don't want to claim that by merely giving a definition that these things exist. If you ask me for the definition of a mermaid, half woman, half fish, that's what I would tell you. But I don't believe they exist. I mean, there's some women in Florida who do a good fake for the audience, but, they're not mermaids. So, a necessary being is something that must always exist. Now, we don't know if there are any necessary beings yet, but the first stage of the third way is to try to argue that we do know that at least some possible beings exist. So I'll give you the argument for that unless you want to chime in.
No, go right ahead. You're doing great. Okay.
So we know that possible beings exist because, again, we could think of ourselves, right? If my parents don't meet, I wouldn't exist. They're the causes of me in some sense, right? Without them, I wouldn't have existence. So indirectly, by knowing that my parents are the causes of me, I know that my existence is contingent. It's not necessary, right? Mm-hmm. And so to be a possible being means you depend on a cause or causes in order to exist. So the next stage of the third way, now that we know there's at least one possible being like ourselves or multiple people, the next stage is a thought experiment. I love thought experiments. Philosophers don't get a lot of funding, but we have great minds, so we do thought experiments. The thought experiment is this. Is it possible that everything that exists in reality is only a possible being? In other words, is it possible that there are no necessary beings, only possible beings? And we realize when we think this through, no, that's not possible. Now, there's 4 reasons why, it's not possible that the only thing that exists are possible beings. Now, look, when we do thought experiments, we got to make them fun, and we got to make them as simple as possible so they're powerful. So the easiest thing to do is try to imagine a universe it's a very lonely universe. It only has one possible being. So no planets, no stars, no extra people. I don't know if you want to think of like a little particle or a little electron. Wait, just something simple. A universe with only one possible being. Could that exist? No. And here's why. We've already established that to be a possible being means you're dependent on a cause, right? I'm dependent on my parents. And if they didn't meet, I wouldn't exist. But in a world with only one possible being, there is no other being to be the cause for that possible being. So that's a real problem, right?
Right.
And then there's another problem.
Okay.
We could try to say that nothingness somehow caused this one possible being. But nothingness can't act as a cause, because to be nothing means you have no causal power. If nothingness had causal power, well, then it wouldn't be nothing. So that's out.
Okay.
Any questions? Okay, I'll move to the third reason. Some people might say, well, maybe somehow this one possible being caused itself. But this is not going to work for two reasons. Think about it. In order to cause itself, it has to exist in some sense to act as a cause. But if it already exists, then it doesn't need to cause itself. That would be redundant, right? And to say that something causes itself, I think is ultimately contradictory, because in some sense it's prior to itself and it's also after or posterior to itself, and that's impossible, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so things are looking really grim for this lonely universe with the one possible being, right? There's only one other chess move that I think we can do at this point. We can add one more possible being. So now it's a less lonely.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. So you have, let's say 2. Okay.
So now we have 2.
Very
Let's
good.
call them A and B. Just, simple way to think about them. So adding one possible being helps a little, because we could say, well, if you want to explain A's existence, we could say B caused A, right? But what caused B? See, now we're only pushing the problem back, right? Now, the last move, last variant of this move is to say, well, okay, A causes B and B causes A. Now everything has a cause and everything is beautiful and honky-dory in this one little world. But no, that's going to be a vicious circularity. If A causes B and B causes A, there's really no way for this to work out. It's the example I give my students is something like this. It's kind of like in the old days when you had simple cars, right? No GPSs, no OnStar. If you locked your keys in the car, well, you need to open the door to get the keys, but you need the keys to open the door, so you're stuck in a kind of circularity. Now, it's not vicious, because you could break the window and that would solve it, right? But if A causes B and B causes A, there's no way out of that. It doesn't make any sense, because if A is causing B and B is causing A, then in order for A to cause B, B already has to cause A, but B can't cause A without A already causing B. It's a nightmare. I know it sounds terrible, but the point is it's a vicious circularity, and it's just not going to work. So the ultimate conclusion is you can't have a world with just all possible beings. That's fun.
Very good. All right. We're chatting with Dr. Robert Delfino about Aquinas' third way, and more to come on the other side of the break. Stay tuned.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him in his life, the guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the mornings, and he's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show and the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Wow. Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
This is Terry Barber. I want to invite you to take advantage of having your funeral or your loved one's funeral at the Sacred Heart Chapel in downtown Covina. It's a 115-year-old church, beautiful chapel, And all you got to do is call me at 661-972-7872, and I'll personally make the arrangements with your mortuary to have your funeral or your loved one's funeral here at Sacred Heart Chapel. You won't regret it. 661-972-7872. God love you. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Dr. Robert Delfino about Aquinas' third way, and we're talking about two basic ways of being. There is possible being, there is necessary being, and Dr. Delfino, you did an outstanding job talking about possible being, really pointedly get down to some very simple concepts. And I love that example you give about the keys being locked in the car, because you're right. You end up with this impossible circularity that you can't open the car door without the keys, and the keys are inside. So it's like, okay, so what comes first, the chicken or the egg, I suppose?
Or with OnStar and all this stuff. But I'm glad you like the example. So
yeah, I forgot about the OnStar twist. Now that's interesting.
So we're ready to move to the next stage, but let me just do a teeny little summary at this point. So previously we were talking about a thought experiment. Could everything that exists in the universe be a possible being? In other words, there are no necessary beings. And we realized that that's impossible, right? We imagine a world where there's just one possible being, but this is a problem because a possible being is always dependent on a cause outside of it. And in a world with only one thing, there is no cause outside of it. We realize that nothingness can't cause anything because nothingness has no power to cause anything. We realize that this one possible being can't cause itself because that would be contradictory. And we realize that if we add another possible being, that there's that vicious circularity with like the keys in the car and locked and all that. So the conclusion of all that is we can't have a world with only possible beings, which means there must be at least one necessary being that exists in order to explain the things around us that we see, because we know things exist. I mean, you and I are here talking where we exist, right?
Yeah, right. I hope so. But that's another thought experiment.
Yeah, I had a friend who doubted he existed for a few years. I don't know how that's possible. Maybe he's a better philosopher than I am. Probably is. So now we can move to the next stage. And actually, this is where it starts to get fun, because the early stages are like preparatory. But
right.
So we know that there has to be at least one necessary being. But guess what? There are two kinds of necessary beings. The first kind are necessary through itself, and the second kind are necessary through another. Now, this can get pretty tedious and crazy philosophical, but I have a nice example for it. Think of the sun. Every day we wake up, and if we go outside and it's not cloudy, we see the beautiful sun, which gives us light, and without it, there wouldn't be life on this planet. Well, let's do another thought experiment, right? Imagine that the sun always existed, and the sun will always exist. In this thought experiment, right, the sun would be a necessary being. Now, light is always coming out of the sun. So if the sun always existed, and it always will exist, well, if light's always coming out of it, the light always existed, and the light will always exist. But notice the difference. The light is still dependent on the sun to exist. If you could somehow destroy the sun, then the light would no longer exist. So the light is necessary, but necessary through another, the sun. Sun, however, in this example, is necessary through itself. So any questions on that distinction?
No, I like that. Yeah, so as long as you have whenever you have the sun, you have light, necessarily. But but the light is only through the sun. So if you don't have a sun, light doesn't exist. So
right, there's a kind of dependency. Right, the light is still dependent on the sun. So now we go to another thought experiment. and there's a lot of thought experiments today because, the funding in philosophy is very poor. So can it be that the only kind of necessary beings that exist are necessary through another? And we realize the answer here is no, too. Because, it's similar to our earlier reasoning. When something is necessary through another, well, that something is dependent on something else. And so if A is dependent on B, and B is also necessary through another, well, then B is dependent on C. But if C is also necessary through another, then C is dependent on D. Now, this is not going to work unless there's something that's necessary in itself. Because only something that's necessary in itself can give necessity to others. Now, does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, that's very good. So I guess to use an analogy, if we were like in a dark room with a single window and a shaft of light hits a mirror, and that mirror reflects the light, hits another mirror, so that would be dependent. But if you cut off the light and you just have mirrors facing each other, like you wouldn't have light.
That's a great example. I may have to use that in class, Gary. Very good. Yeah, those mirrors are intermediary causes. They are just receiving the light and then passing it on. But if there's no light to receive, then, like you said, you wouldn't have any light in the room. It'd be dark, right?
Okay. Yeah, good. Hey,
yeah,
that's
very good.
Chalk one up for the host.
Definitely. So what Aquinas basically argues in a nutshell, and I'm not going to belabor the point. I think we've made it, and your mirror example is excellent. Is that there has to be at least one being that has necessary existence through itself. In other words, it's not dependent on anything to get this necessary being. Yeah. And so that's an important conclusion. Now, in a way, that's sort of the final conclusion that Aquinas reaches in the third way, that there has to be a being that's necessary through itself. However, there's a little more we can talk about, and I'm going to do that, and then I know we have one more section coming up. So I'm going to do a little bit now, and then we'll close it up in the next section. So
okay.
It turns out that if a being is necessary through itself, it's completely self-sufficient for its existence. It doesn't require any cause for its existence. It turns out that thing must be, and now this is going to sound strange, but existence itself, or if you want to use the phrase, being itself. And what's beautiful here is that this actually accords with divine revelation in the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? In Exodus 3:14, Moses asks God, "Who shall I say is sending me?" And this is, the great I am who am, right? It sounds like God is being itself, right? And so I find that very interesting that a philosophical argument can get us a little close to some of the revelation here. Now, I can give you the argument, if you'd like, why God has to be existence itself. It gets a little tricky, but not too bad. Would you like me to do that next?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Let's go all the way.
Okay, good. Right. No holds barred philosophy.
That's right.
So here we need to think of a set of distinctions between existence and essence. Now, it sounds fancy, but it's really something we all know about, even if we don't use those terms. Imagine if you're walking through the park at night, and it's pretty dark, and you hear and also see some little animal of sorts scurry past you, like maybe 10 feet in front of you. It's really fast. You don't know what it is. Now, you know it exists because you saw the shape moving and you heard it, running with its feet or whatever. But, it could be a raccoon. It could be an opossum. Maybe it's a cat. You don't know. You know it exists, but you don't know its essence. You don't know the kind of thing that it is. So what's interesting is the reverse can also be true. If I tell you that the essence of a mermaid is to be half woman, half fish, women with tails that swim in the sea and all that kind of stuff, you don't know just by pondering the essence whether they really exist. Now, we would have found them on this planet by now with all the cameras and videos, but we haven't. But maybe on some other planet, there are things that look like women that have, scales and they live in the sea, right? You can't know from the essence alone that these things exist, right?
Right.
Okay, so we have at least the conceptual distinction between essence and existence, right? One doesn't tell you about the other. Well, we could also hypothesize a real distinction between essence and existence. What would the real distinction mean? It would mean that they're not identical, that they're different. But if existence and essence were really distinct in a being that's necessary through itself, it turns out that would be no good. Because if essence and existence are really distinct, now we have a kind of composition. We have two different things that have been joined, but when different things are joined, they need a cause. So because necessary through itself being cannot be dependent on anything else, right? Otherwise, it would be necessary through another. Because necessary through itself being cannot be dependent on anything else in order to exist, it's impossible for its essence and its existence to be different. In other words, they must be identical. It must be being itself in all of its purity. And this is already starting to resemble the great I am of the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yeah. What it is that it is.
Right.
All right.
Very
So
good.
I got 2 stars today. This is great. This is a great program for me.
Oh, Gary, you're better than me. Come on.
Yeah.
Wow.
And if you could, like really quick, sometimes people get tripped up on this. Like, again, why is it that if something's made of more than one part, that it kind of needs another thing to, other than itself to be?
I guess the best way I could try to talk about that is, when something is homogeneous, when it has a kind of purity, it has a kind of unity. And if something is different from it, well, it's not that. So it doesn't have that kind of unity with it. So it has to be joined by a cause. Like the example I like to give, and it's a little mundane, is think about a painting. What do you need to have a painting in an art gallery? Well, you need a canvas, and then you got to put some paint on it. Well, a canvas is different from paint. And anytime you have things that are different, they need a cause to join them because they're not naturally one. I don't know, does that make sense?
Good. That's excellent. Very good.
No problem. So I know we don't have a lot of time in this segment, but in the next segment, if you like, there's a few things I could talk about. So we still haven't really done enough to claim that this necessary through itself being is God. But here's what we'd have to do, and we might be able to do some of this later. We'd have to show that there's only one reality that has necessary being through itself. We want to have one God, not many gods, right? Mm-hmm. We'd have to show that this reality is the creator of all things, that they wouldn't exist without it. We've done a little bit of that because by saying it's necessary through itself, that means other things are dependent on it for existence. But to get to creatorship, you need a little more. And then we'd have to show that it's intelligent and loving. If we could do all of that there's only one necessary being through itself, that it's the creator of all things, that it's intelligent and loving, that sounds highly suspicious to me. If I were a detective, I'm like, that sounds like God. Right?
That's right. Yeah. And if there's anybody that can do it in one segment, sir, it is you. So I have supreme confidence on the other side of the break. Wow, that's a fascinating. I can't wait to see how you do that, and I'm sure everyone listening is as well. Great cliffhanger before the break. All right. Okay. Well, we're talking with Dr. Robert Delfino, who's co-author of Does God Exist? A Socratic Dialogue on the 5 Ways Thomas Aquinas. He co-wrote it with Matt Brad. And you heard the cliffhanger, folks. Stay tuned and find out how this necessary being is God. We'll be right back.
This is Jesse Romero.
And I'm Terry Barber.
From the Terry and Jesse Show. And we invite you to listen to the Holy Hour of Power, High Energy Catholic Radio. We're 2 Catholics with a PhD in common sense. We're on Monday through Friday on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
What we're going to give you is masculine Catholic teachings on the faith. We say we're too inspired to be tired, we're too protected to be dejected, and we're too renewed to be subdued. Why? Because we believe in Jesus Christ and His bride, the Church, and we will take each issue of the day and show you how the Catholic Church has the answer for our culture. What we really do is bring men back into the Catholic Church, which it's about time to do. We want men to be leaders in their Catholic faith so that they can bring their family to heaven.
Our program is not right versus left, it's right versus wrong, and our program is where Catholicism and culture intersect. It's High Energy Catholic Radio.
We're going to inspire you to fall deeper in love with Jesus Christ and His bride, the Church.
The Terry and Jesse Show on the Virgin Most Powerful app.
Jesus said to the apostles in Luke chapter 10, "Whoever listens to you listens to me, and whoever rejects you rejects me." According to St. Boniface, in her voyage across the ocean of this world, The church is like a great ship being pounded by the waves of life's different stresses. Our duty is not to abandon ship, but to keep her on course. May our Lord help us remain ever faithful to His church, to aid and defend her.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Dr. Robert Delfino about Aquinas' third way of demonstrating the existence of God. And boy, if you've just tuned in, you missed a great program because Dr. Delfino is really breaking this down very simply. And we kind of reached almost the goal. We've shown that there has to be at least one necessary being that is not comprised of parts. So someone may say, okay, fine, but that doesn't sound like your Christian God, really. I mean, it might say he's the I am, the self-existing one, but where do you go from there?
Okay, so I have my work cut out for me, don't I? Let me see. I'll try to do as much as I can in about 10 minutes. So we concluded shortly ago that if something has necessary existence through itself, that it has to be existence itself. Because if there were a real difference, a real distinction between its essence, what it is, and its existence, that it is, then like the canvas with the paint, a cause would have had to join them, but that's no good. Then it wouldn't be necessary through itself. So right. I want to think about the idea of existence itself, or let's use the phrase pure being, right? God is not limited by any essence, right? A frog is a kind of essence, but they can't speak like we do, and they don't appear to be intelligent like humans are. So essences are always limiting factors. But if God is pure being, existence in all of its purity, majesty, and infinite perfection, then God is unlimited and all-powerful. But we have to show that there's only one pure being. Otherwise, we would live in a universe with competing gods, which would be bad for human beings, right?
Yeah.
So let's do that.
Okay.
Now this is going to get a little abstract, but I'm going to try to make it simple. So hopefully this is a helpful example. Think about you and I. Now, we're both human beings, and we're both men and all that, but we're not the same individual man, right? I'm not married to your wife. I'm assuming you're married. And you're not married to my wife. Otherwise, there'd be lawsuits, right? So right. You have properties that I don't have, and I have properties that you don't have. So one of the philosophical principles is if what are allegedly two things share every property in common, or every property is identical, then they're actually not two things. They're one and the same thing. So to give you an example, here's a phrase. The guy talking to Gary now and Robert Delfino, those two phrases actually point to one and the same identical guy, right? Because those two phrases point to something that has all the properties identical. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
But you and I don't have all properties identical, and that's why we're two different human beings. Okay. Right. So if necessary being through itself is pure being, the only way that you could have another pure being, a second one, would be if, the second pure being has to have at least one property that differentiates it or separates it from the first pure being.
Yes.
But guess what? If the second pure being has a property that the other one doesn't have, then the second one's not pure being. It's being plus some property, which is bad because not only is it not pure being, but it's a composition, which means it needs a cause, and it can't be necessary through itself. Does that make sense?
Very good. Hey, let me throw out something really quick.
Okay.
I've tried this with a class, and somebody said, well, let's say there's a picture of you, and then there's another picture of you, and they both are absolutely perfectly identical. you still have two things. And I said, yeah, but there's one thing they're not. They have different locations. So
Excellent.
If they were
yes.
to be the same, then they would coalesce into one thing. Is that correct?
That is perfect. Right. They do have different properties. They exist in different spatial locations. Like one's on that chair and the other one's on a different chair. But I'm a New York passionate Italian guy. I would go over to one picture and I would like tear it up and say, look, the other one's unaffected. They're not the same. I know, I'm crazy. But,
that's great.
Get sued too. So there can only be one being that's necessary through itself. So that's good. We've almost gotten to monotheism. How can we show it's the creator of all things? Well, I think I'm going to attempt something that's a little risky, but I'll give it a whirl. So it turns out that in God, I'm going to start using the word God now because necessary being through itself is just too much verbiage. So in God, it turns out essence and existence, what God is and that he is, are identical. There's no difference, right? But in creatures, it turns out there is a real distinction. And here's why. I gave arguments earlier that essence and existence have to be identical in God, and that they only can be identical in one reality, right? Because to have another pure being, it has to have a property that the other one doesn't have, but then it's not pure being, right? So if existence and essence can be identical in only one reality, that means in everything else that exists, existence and essence must be non-identical or really distinct, which means those essences have to acquire existence. And the only thing that could give them existence would be something that has existence in itself, and that would be God. So God has to be the creator of all things. Nothing besides God would exist if he didn't impart to them existence, which is the act of creation. Any comments on that?
Yeah. Wow. That's great. I never thought of it, but you're right. That does certainly point to a creative act.
Yeah, and actually this is wonderful because now all we have to do is the intelligent and loving, and I have like 5 minutes now. I'm kidding.
And you probably could do it with one arm tied behind your back.
No, I struggle with this stuff too. In fact, doing philosophy, quote unquote, in a hurry is fun, especially with you, but it's tough.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
All right, let me jump in for the intelligent and loving. Now, look, I can't do it in a obviously deep and meticulous way, but I'll give you your audience a taste of how it works. Okay. So let's take the intelligence, right? If God is the cause of the existence of all things, which I've just been arguing, right? He's the creator. Well, the effect cannot be greater than the cause. Now, you and I are obviously intelligent because we're talking, we're engaging in these deep philosophical arguments, right? So if we were caused by God, right, the effect can't be greater than the cause. We can't have any perfection that the cause would lack. So it's because God is intelligent that he's able to cause intelligence in us. Otherwise, we would have to say the effect is greater than the cause, but that makes no sense because then the greater part, comes from nothing? That makes no sense. So God must possess intelligence in some way. Any comments on that?
No, that's very good. Would intelligence be an essence?
Well, actually, intelligence, according to Aquinas, is the essence of the angels. He sometimes calls the angels intelligences, right? They are pure minds, disembodied spirits. They never had physical bodies or anything like that. So they are intelligences, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's just
all right.
Yeah, that's very good.
In my last few minutes, I'm going to do the loving. I can't.
You can do it.
I'm able to do this. Okay, so this is again just the taste. Okay, so think about this: when you love somebody, genuinely love them, right? You do good things for them, not because you want something back in return. That would be selfish. No, you do good things for them because you want them to be happy. You love them. You this is most apparent with like children. We often want to help our children because we hate to see them sad. We love them, right? Well, think about what God has done for us based on all the arguments we talked about today. He's given us existence, and not just any kind of existence, right? We're alive, we're intelligent, we have freedom. This is an act of love. And he's not doing it for himself, because if he's necessary through himself, that means he's completely self-sufficient. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't need a fan club to clap for him. He doesn't get lonely or anything like that. So if he's giving us these good things for our own benefit so that we too can live and enjoy living and fall in love and have a relationship with him, it seems to me that is a gift of profound love. And for me, it's one of the most beautiful aspects of Christianity, that God loves us so much, he brings us into being so that we can share life with him and have a little taste of what it is to be like him, right? Partakers of the divine nature, I think, as St. Peter puts it in the New Testament. And for me, that just, it gives me faith and hope for the world. You know, God's love will be triumphant in the end, although guys like you and I have to fight the good fight and do our part to, you know, do what we can to keep it alive.
Yeah. Yeah. So if anybody doubts that God loves them, check to see if you exist. Because if you do, God loves you. I love that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. All right. Wow. And you know what? You have a couple of minutes to spare, too. You are amazing.
Nah, I don't know about that, but it's all you, man. Whatever you want to talk about now, it's your show.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about you. Do you have a blog or a website that people could go to, you know, keep abreast of the things you're writing, doing?
You know, I'm so ashamed. I don't. I probably should get a website. But you know what I'm worried about, Gary? Look, I have two little boys, a 7-year-old and a 6-year-old, who drive me crazy. And I constantly have to help them and do this and do that. And I love them, right? But I don't really have time for a website. And also, I have to be honest with you, I'm a little afraid that I'm going to get like, you know, a lot of people out there in the world are good, but there's always that 2% that want to send you hate mail and all that. And I don't know if I want to deal with all that stuff, you know.
Yeah, sure. No, I hear you. I mean, if you check my website, you'll see it's like 3 to 4 weeks behind, and you know, it's a mess. So yeah, it is an ongoing chore, that's for sure.
Well, you're doing a great job with your show.
Well,
so congratulations.
I appreciate that. And you need better funding. I think that's probably something that we should be pushing for. Fund the philosophers, folks, because they're doing bang up jobs, as you can tell with these awesome analogies. You know, this is one of those shows that I think I'm probably going to go back and listen to again and again and take notes. Just really great stuff.
Well, thank you so much. That really made my day to hear those kind words. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on the show. That's Dr. Robert Delfino. And again, you know, let me give you this book title. It's called Does God Exist? A Socratic Dialogue on the 5 Ways of Thomas Aquinas. You could probably get it through Amazon, or even better, you know, just ask your local Catholic bookstore if they don't have it to get a copy of it. It's by Matt Fradd and Dr. Robert Delfino. And if you liked some of these analogies, I mean, that whole book is like that. It's just very down-to-earth conversation between AJ and Lucy, a Catholic who's into Thomas Aquinas, and AJ who's more into, you know, the new atheism. And I think they do a very good job steel manning, you know, giving really good arguments for and against. And so check that out, folks. You know, Christmas is coming up, and one of these days I'm going to do a book recommend for Christmas presents. And I love this book. It's Does God Exist? A Socratic Dialogue on the 5 Ways of Thomas Aquinas by Robert Delfino and Matt Fradd. So pick it up, folks. Get a couple extra copies. Give it to friends. It's all good stuff. And, you know, the fun continues in Hands-On Apologetics. We're going to have Matt Swain come in to the dojo tomorrow. He's going to talk about converts bearing gifts. You know, the blessings the church has through conversions. And also Dr. Doug Beaumont Thursday. We're going to talk about how God talk can sometimes actually push people away from believing in God. So lots of great stuff. Coming up next, High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you with the Terry and Jesse Show. And for me, it's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center and brush off the snow and turn off the dojo lights. I hope everybody has a great day. And God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow to do this thing that we call Hands-On Apologetics. Thank you for listening, everybody, and God bless.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.